What's up, my humans? Welcome to the Conscious Hotline, your source for all things conscious and hot. I am your co host, Altair Kambata, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing a friend of mine, Liam McClintock. He is the founder of FitMind and a certified meditation instructor and studying neuroscience. This is going to be a really juicy, really interesting conversation about the potential of the mind and the mind as the next frontier in human exploration and development. So I'm going to bring him on now. Here we go. Liam, hi.
Hey Altair, how are you?
I'm doing really well, doing super, enjoying life. It's pretty chill day here, pretty chill Sunday. How are you? You're in Denver right now, correct?
I'm at my family's house in New Hampshire.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
nice.
good,
That seems like a good place to wait out the storm.
for sure. It's like a little hermitage here in the woods.
I feel like that's right up your alley.
Exactly.
So you're a happy camper.
Definitely. Yeah, we're on the lake here, so some good activities and easy to stay distanced.
Yes, yes. Well, also, I'm sure you have all kinds of ways of filling your day because you're just that kind of person. I'm wondering how you're spending your days at the moment.
Yeah, I've been mostly in reflection. Like occasionally people will come up here and keep me company, but I've actually been kind of holed up here since COVID took off and my lease in Denver was up, so I came out here until international travel opens up pretty much. There's some travel I've been wanting to do, but until then, this has been a good opportunity just to go deep in my meditation practice. So I've actually just been doing a ton of meditation and sprinkled in with some swimming and other activities, and then just working on the business.
That's wonderful. I had a feeling you were going to say that. So why don't you tell our listeners more about what it is that you do? I feel like I we haven't known each other that long, to be honest. And in the time that we have known each other, the inception of FitMind emerged
Yeah.
and has grown incredibly quickly, which is a testament to your hard work and dedication, but also this new interest, this growing interest in personal development and the power of the mind and meditation. So why don't you just give us a sense of what it is that you're up to?
Yeah, well, so FitMind is a meditation training company, and it's primarily an app now. It started out with the corporate workshops. I was going into mostly tech companies and teaching people how to train their minds to be more productive in work, but then also just living a more kind of conscious and more optimized life, essentially. And then I took those principles, and to scale it, I put them on an app. So it's a program. You go through a 30-day foundational training program, and then you continue with other techniques once you get through that once you get the foundations down. And so I think now there's over 70 different techniques taught on the app. And this is pulled from various traditions from, Indo-Tibetan meditation techniques to Zen to yogic breathing, and just kind of taking all these different tools and putting them into a toolkit so you can find the ones that work for you. And the reason that I felt like I wanted to build this was a couple of issues I was seeing from my own perspective. I'm very science minded, and a lot of the other kind of apps out there and a lot of the language just to me wasn't really resonating. So I wanted to build something that was science based and explaining the science behind how the mind worked and the psychology behind why these methods were so effective. Because I wanted to know why they worked before I delved into them. That's just like a personal thing, and kind of understand the mechanisms. And so I went and researched all that and then put it into the app. And then the other thing was I felt like a lot of people they were only learning one or two techniques, and they thought like meditation was just focusing on your breath, or was just, loving kindness, or like a body scan. Like those are the three popular ones in the US right now. And there's so many different techniques out there. There's over 800 different meditation methods. And so just as exercise is this umbrella term for many different ways of moving your body, and some people find, it can take people a lifetime to find the one that really works for them. And once they do, then it becomes much more enjoyable. So I think meditation should be viewed similarly, and that people should have access to the full kind of buffet of what is out there.
I love that. And I love that you're an empiricist. I love that you're science minded. We need entryways into the power and the potential of meditation as a daily practice, as an experience that's going to improve daily life. We need it packaged in a way that's going to ultimately be inviting and be persuasive enough that someone wants to participate. Because I think that what we really want to do is create a practice that feels universal, that feels accessible to every individual, right? This is something that everyone can do if they're finding the right, if they don't like meditation, perhaps they just haven't found the way that appeals to them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's like if someone said, I don't like exercise, and all they had tried was swimming, and they jumped in the deep end and kind of floundered around for a bit and decided exercise isn't for me, I can do without it. There's a lot of different methods, and it's kind of, so for some people, for example, well, one example is if you have a lot of past trauma, it's good to start with like a meditation that's based in your body. You don't want to be like in your mind a lot with like necessarily focusing on the breath or something. So that's an example of, depending on you personally, you might want to start with a certain type, a somatic meditation. But then also, like, some people are just so in their heads, they just, no matter what they do, they feel like they can't calm down. And in which case, maybe they start with just a deep, like, yogic breath, and their whole meditation is just using the breath to change their physiology. And then they're going to feel different, even if there's so much chaos going on in their head. So there's a lot of different ways to, there's a lot of different ways to come at it. And I just feel like in the West, there have been so many misbrandings and misrepresentations of what meditation is. And I think it's still so confusing because it's just, but the way I've come to see it is just a systematic way of training the mind. And so there's a lot of different ways to come at that. And I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions still, because you had the kind of hippie movement, which brought a certain types of meditation into prevalence. And then in the 70s, and then you also had you've had like the mindfulness movement kind of, and you've had, so all these different ways of bringing it. And I think it's all great because it's as long as these things make it here, but just, there's different ways of coming at it. And I think for more science-minded folks, it's important to understand that there's also a ton of empirical research that's backing up these methods.
Totally. And let's talk about training the brain. Why is that important? Why is it important to train the mind? The first kind of concept that comes to me is, well, how powerful is it to be able to recognize when the mind or the brain is getting really, really excited about the possibility of like a short-term satisfaction or a type of pleasure that we could receive immediately. And in contrast to that is perhaps the satisfaction of pleasure that we would receive after, prolonging some kind of a process or a long-term commitment to a certain process, in favor of that long-term satisfaction. Is that something where, mindfulness and meditation can come into the picture?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the quality of our minds determines the quality of our lives, and our minds are building our realities in each moment. I think there's this misconception also that the world's just out there, and it's just creating a perfect movie of it in your mind, and you're interpreting things exactly as they are. And it turns out that our perceptions determine all of our realities. So yeah, there is like a lamp there that we can all agree on, but the way that I project onto it and the interpretations I have of it, all of that is being constructed by my mind. And it turns out we can train the mind to perceive the world in better and better and more useful and more clear and helpful ways. And so
Hmm.
I just think to me, that's the whole project of meditation. And, obviously relating to others in more helpful ways and more loving ways. And yeah, so that's kind of, yeah. And then, so to answer so the brain comes with a lot of evolutionary baggage. It's not designed to make us happy or healthy, unfortunately. At one point, it was relatively in sync with the environment, and you would just do what made you happy, and then that would lead to more survival and reproduction, and that's kind of how evolution works. But then recently, we've got all this technology, a lot of it really helpful, but it's also extremely maladaptive. So we put ourselves in situations where you can't just follow your hedonic pleasures, because that's the unexamined life, which leads to all down all sorts of bad paths. Now there's more ways than ever to fall down an addictive path, or start chasing the wrong things, the short-term pleasures that aren't going to lead to a fulfilling life. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we need to be in control, in conscious control of our minds. And if you think about it from the neurological level, there's like an oversimplified model of the brain where at the bottom you have the brain stem and the reptilian brain, and these are the oldest structures of the brain. It's actually a good way of thinking about it as like your hand. So in the bottom you have like the brain stem down here, and this evolved first, and kind of the more primal reptilian brain. This is keeping us alive, and this is just very basic animal instincts. And then on top of this, you have another layer, which is like the limbic system. This is the more emotional brain, which evolved next. And then you have on top of that the cortex and the prefrontal cortex, especially. This is really what makes us human, is our ability to think logically and reason and process things. So there's and these are often at odds. So your reptilian brain might get you all like angry and want to like punch someone for something, and then your rational brain will say, no, hold on, we can't do that. That's not okay. Let's be rational. So there's always this kind of tug of war between your upstairs brain, which is more recently evolved. It's only about 40,000 years old, and your ancient brain, which is really the nervous system has been evolving for 600 million years. So a lot of those primal instincts think that still it's called your lizard brain for a reason. It thinks you're like a lizard, and then the emotional brain might behave more like a chimpanzee. So it's like a little more social, but it still doesn't really understand the modern world. So we have to learn to take control of this system that's often outdated with our rational brain, so that we can have more control. And they've shown in studies that the prefrontal cortex, for example, gains more. I don't know if this like hand movement I'm doing is helpful at all, but it's helping me think through it. So it's helping the prefrontal cortex gains a stronger connection over the amygdala, for example, which is like the fear and like emotion center of the brain. So we become more rational. We become essentially more human. Like we become more in control of our minds and our reactions, and we can start to behave in ways that are going to lead to long-term fulfillment over the short-term pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so I loved also what you said about perception, and that the mind is in a constant state of interpretation. And so why is it that when it comes to perception, we're so often perceiving the world in a way that produces suffering? And I
Yeah.
think about Buddhism, and I think about the very first noble truth, which is that there is suffering, that it is an inevitability of the human experience. And so how does this, training the brain, evolving these newer, more evolved aspects of the matter, the physical matter, the tissue of our consciousness, how can that go hand in hand with the alleviation of suffering and living a life where our perception is not so much dictated or affected by the potential of suffering? Because often it's an illusion that there's even any suffering happening at all.
Well, this is a really big important question. I'll try to give a succinct answer. or as far as like I'm aware of the answer, which is um, I think again, like I look at it in evolutionary terms and how the brain evolved. And so the first thing is in terms of perception, there's so much information out there. There's so much information in the universe that if our brains were to try to take in all that information, we would be so inefficient as organisms that we wouldn't have enough energy to process all of it. So we get a thin sliver of all the information out there. And as an example, if that doesn't make sense, like imagine you're a snake, you're seeing a completely different world because you're seeing through, they have like infrared sensors in their heads and such. So they see a completely different world. So then you kind of wonder like, what is reality? It's really just reality is the information sliver that's coming to you. Then
Mm-hmm.
of that information we take in, we get an even smaller fraction of it is conscious. You get, I think there was some estimate where it's like 44 million bits of information a second come to you, and 55 bits of that is conscious. So a lot of it is just subconscious, enters your awareness, but it doesn't enter your conscious awareness, but you're still perceiving it. So we get a fraction of a fraction of whatever's out there. And then of that fraction, then we're layering on top of that our projections based on past memories and conditioning, and we're building like a model of the world. So we're not seeing reality at all. We're seeing what would have helped us pass our genes on to the next generation. That's like how evolutionary game theory works. Is so and there's actually a physicist, I think his last name's Hoffman, David Hoffman, I think. I might have that wrong, but anyways, he's got something called the multimodal user interface theory, which is one of the most modern theories of how consciousness works, and it just says that there's this is like what you're perceiving right now is like a computer screen. So you see things as far as they're useful to you. So like, I'm not looking at this phone. This phone is like an icon because it's useful. I can interact with it just as a trash can icon on your desktop computer is something that's not real. It's a bunch of bits. It's a bunch of ones and zeros. But it needs to be useful to you as the user. So you've created like a trash can and like files that you can drag into it. And that's kind of the reality we're living in, is like our model of all this tangle of information made sense for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this, so we're living in our own, we're literally living in our own realities. And if you look about it in evolutionary terms, we have an innate negativity bias. And this is how I think about the first noble truth of Buddhism. Not necessarily life is suffering. I would say, I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. I would say more like life is dissatisfactory. In other words, in each moment, your mind, if you were a satisfied, happy-go-lucky creature, you wouldn't have passed your genes on to the next generation. And so you need to always be a little bit, oh, there's a problem to solve. And we all feel this most of the time. There's like a mini me in the head with a problem to solve. Nothing's ever quite right unless everything, I mean, things are quite right, but for very fleeting moments. And then we think about our next need. So, you're hungry on a micro level, you're hungry. You need that slice of pizza. You think, once I get that, I'll be happy. You get it, and you're happy for like a couple seconds, but then your mind wants another bite, and then you're full. And then your mind wants to, go use the bathroom or something. So on a micro level, we're never quite satisfied. And on a macro level too, we always think, if I just had that partner, if I just had that job, if I just had a little more money in my bank account, then I would be happy. And I think if we think back on our lives, it's always true that you get that. If you get that thing that you wanted, even then there's another problem to solve, right? So the mind is always going to convince you that there's one more thing that you need to do to be happy. And so that's the reprogramming process that needs to take place, is that our minds are wired to have this negativity bias, to see things in such a way that, things are threats. Because, for example, if there was a rustle in the bushes, if your ancestor heard a rustle in the bushes, and they were just kind of carefree about it, that ancestor probably got eaten and didn't pass on that trait of being carefree, as opposed to the jittery ancestor who, to them, every rustle in the bush was a potential predator that might eat them. So we're the jittery offspring. So our minds have this negativity bias innate in us, and we have to reprogram that so we can chill out and find more presence and happiness.
Beautifully said, beautifully described. And I also see this, there's a possibility of when we're becoming intimate with the mind and we're noticing and observing the mind and the needs that come up and the chatter that comes up, and we get a sense of what it's there to do for us, then there is an opportunity and an invitation to perhaps make some changes insofar as what our expectations about life are, or make some changes perhaps about what it is that we want to value and prioritize in our day. And by flexing the muscle of the mind, we can, as I understand it, actually rewire the pathways, the synaptic pathways of the brain in order to produce a mental environment that's more conducive to what it is that we do value, or the kind of experience that we would want to perceive in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, okay, nice. Yeah, and I know that you've spent some time, like you spent 3 days in a closet in the dark. You did that,
Yeah,
right?
guilty. Yeah, yeah, I did.
And, when my brother passed away unexpectedly, I went to go live in a cabin in the woods for a year where I was building my own fire, where I felt like I wanted to be close to my own mind so that I could take my life back in a way and determine what's important to me. I think that a lot of people going through COVID, being alone with their thoughts, realize I want to make some kind of a change in how I approach life. And it has to do with this intimate relationship we can cultivate with the mind. I know, in the mythos of Batman, he went to go
Yeah.
study with the Tibetan monks in order to really step into his power and his potential. And so, what would you say about that in terms of this heroic act in a way of exploring the mind as a frontier for exploring our potential?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it is a hero's journey that we can all take, but it does take that bold move, because a lot of us don't want to look inside. There's a quote that I like from Joseph Conrad, I believe, who's the guy who came up with the hero's journey, and
Oh,
he
Campbell,
said,
Joseph Campbell.
sorry, Joseph Campbell, you got it. He said the the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. And so I think for a lot of us, that deep dive is uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. The mind can be a scary place, but I think it's necessary because the alternative is that our subconscious minds and currents determine our whole lives, and we live unconsciously, and that's the unexamined life, which Socrates said is not worth living. So I think our choice is that we have to be the hero in the story. Otherwise, that's a sad life. I think, but and the thing is, it looks different for everyone. Like everyone's on their own journey. It doesn't like your heroic thing could be like you're battling depression and it's like a solo battle. For a lot, like the struggle is often not taking place in this, like, you're not literally climbing a mountain in Tibet to go become Batman, but it's your version of that, whoever you are. So everyone's got their own stuff they're dealing with, and everyone can be the hero in their own journey if they, and I think that's a great way of viewing it. I really think everyone is on that journey in some sense, whether they realize it or not.
Beautiful. Yeah, I totally agree. And in the time that we have left, I've had some really interesting conversations with you about envisioning communities that on some level are more mindful, that have adapted or adopted various social conditions in order to produce environments that are creating healthier and happier experiences for people. We've talked about this a little bit in terms of what that looks like individually, But then how
Yeah.
do you extrapolate that out into designing communities that support this as a way of life? So I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts on what you've kind of created as you've been the architect of mindful communities.
Yeah, well, so I think this period, COVID, has really forced us in a lot of ways to consider how do we want to be living as societies and as larger and larger communities, just going out from the individual into, what's your neighborhood and, state and so on. And as a world community. But I really think it starts on like a micro level. Like I think one of the things I've been seeing in the world we live in today is there's a lot of problems. There's endless problems, right? There's endless problems to solve. And a lot of the approach is like, well, let's try to like fix everything at once. Like, let's fix everyone else and fix everything at once. And I think it really starts with like fixing ourselves first, working as individuals, and then working as like small scale communities. Like, can we create a really thriving, beautiful community of people as a model for how other people can do it? And that's kind of in America, there was like Boston was the city on a hill, and it showed when,
That's right.
when the Pilgrims came over and they did it right in Boston, then suddenly all these other successful cities popped up and colonies sprung because people could look and say, oh, that's how it can be done. That's how it should be done. So that's what my vision is, that creating communities on a small scale that really work and really create beautiful lives and relationships and values that can then be replicated in other areas. And yeah, I mean, there's so many areas to address, but I think the overall principles are first really understanding ourselves, understanding human nature, and then building communities based on that, putting systems in place to kind of make sure that the darker parts of human nature are under control, and also so that the better parts of human nature can really thrive. And there's a lot of different, I mean, I'm still exploring this area, but like B.F. Skinner, he was a behaviorist psychologist in the mid 1900s, and he wrote a book called Walden 2, where he thought, based on his behavioral principles of like operant conditioning, which is when you get rewards for doing like you can basically condition humans as you would be able to like a cat in an experiment or something. So he wrote a book called Walden 2, and then a couple of communities have been based off of that, like Twin Oaks in Virginia, and then there's another one in Mexico called like Los Hermanadores or something. And anyways, I think that's a little extreme because they've taken like one aspect of psychology and tried to apply that to a village. But I like the way they're thinking about like, let's understand the human mind and create a community off of that, and think about how we can make that work and put in place the principles that then can be applied to like other parts of to other similar villages that want to use these same principles. So I think it really starts with like understanding the human condition, putting in place values, and then think. So as an example, humans we love rituals. So like, how could you build a really great ritual that, and looking at indigenous tribes and like, what do they do for their rituals, and how can we take aspects of that if we're designing a community? And how do we want to be, and then there's more complicated issues like, how do we want to be dividing labor and wealth, and is wealth accumulation a thing, or do we share everything equally, with kind of the free rider problem of people who are more putting in less work. And I think the way you could potentially deal with that is that understanding how the human mind works, we realize that what's good for us personally is also what's best for everyone else, because the mental qualities such as generosity and kindness are good for you personally because they feel better, but they're also good for the community. So ideally, if you had a group of people living together who all understood that like being selfish leads to negative mental qualities, which in the end they're not going to be as happy, then you could have a group of people living together who have all just agreed to themselves and to everyone else, I'm going to do my best to be a good person, to be well intentioned. And in like a utopian world, that's all you would need, right? Is a bunch of people who have agreed to do their best to be good people. But I actually think if you had, as long as there were no like psychopaths in the group, if you had,
Oops, lost you there for a second. But yeah, you were saying,
oh,
so as long as there were no like really bad apples in the group that were just gonna wreak havoc and create chaos.
yeah, you would need a system. I mean, you would need a justice system, but yeah, I mean, I think I'm just thinking in like a utopian of if you are thinking about building a system that could become a utopia, if everyone were training their minds, meditating, putting in the work to recondition the negative programming and the negative mental qualities, I think you could get there towards a world, or at least a microcosm that was full of people that were doing their best to be good people, everyone well intentioned, everyone trying to be logical and rational, having flexible worldviews that could shift with as new information came in. Like those are all prerequisites, I think, to a society that could really work is like everyone doing their own inner work. And that being part of the culture is that everyone's doing their best to train their minds and to become the best version of themselves.
Well, I get really excited as you talk about that. You know, what goes through my mind is what would a community look like if the justice system, if advertising, if nutritional advice, all of that appealed to our higher qualities rather than our like basal
Yeah.
instincts and our scarcity and survival related nature, right? What if
Yeah.
we had systems in place that were reinforcing our higher natures? And I think that's a really exciting world to imagine and to dream about. So thank you, Liam. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge and information with us in just the past half hour. I think you're doing your master's now at King's College London, so they're really lucky to have you. You're
Thank
going to
you.
do great things in that program. And yeah, let our listeners know, like, what's the best way for them to plug into your, what you offer in terms of your app, your website? And is there a
Mm.
way for people to get started today?
Yeah, well, if they have an iPhone, they can, or an iPad, they can go download the FitMind app, FitMind, one word. It's in the Apple App Store. And yeah, you can learn more about that at fitmind.co. Fitmind.co is the website. And yeah, I guess the Instagram is here, fitmind underscore meditation. And so that's probably the best way to interact with FitMind is checking out the app. And there's also a podcast, the FitMind podcast, where I bring on neuroscientists and monks and different experts of the mind. So
Beautiful. We
thank you
will
so
make
much
sure
for
that
having me, Elder. It's been a real honor.
it's a pleasure and a privilege, Liam. You know, we've come a long way from the hot tub party at that hostel in Boulder, which is really fun. I have to say, I did give a pretty decent rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody that night. So I'll remember that fondly.
some some snow angels in our bathing suits too.
Yeah,
That
that's
was
right.
pretty
That was
fun.
good times. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more good times, and of course, like watching everything you do grow and impact the world in such a powerful way. And yeah, just bringing the power of meditation and mindfulness to the planet. Truly, this is an avenue, it's a gateway, it's a door into our evolution as a species. So thank you for what you do, Liam. And I'll make sure that all of your information is in the show notes. And yeah, we'll keep in touch. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Altair. Love what you're doing. Be well.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye.